Many of the styles of writing were syllabic instead of letters, so they were syllables, and a picture meant a set of syllables or a syllable instead of letters. That becomes important. Greek city-states, they, because of the mountainous landscape, they kind of have cities, and cities have properties around them, and that becomes like its own little nation. So they get together. We talked about seafarers, education. Greece is very fond of music. In fact, music was part of every ancient culture. They were always making musical instruments out of things. It's sad that we don't know what very much from the ancient world actually sounded like, because the idea of notes and notation and writing down musical pieces doesn't come about until much later. Think at the earliest, maybe the 600s or 700s. So they've kind of reconstructed some of the instruments, and they've redone some of it. It's fascinating to listen to if you have a chance. The Greeks knew about heliocentricity, that the sun was in the middle of the solar system, that it was a solar system and the earth wasn't the center. At least they knew that scientifically. They didn't always believe it religiously. The Greeks were very fond of athletics. The Olympic Games were there. We're going to skip a bit of the history. I wish we had time for it, but we have to jump to the rise of Macedonia, which is in the middle of page 21. The two most famous Macedonian kings are Philip II and Alexander the Great. Macedonia is this region in northern Greece. It's mountainous, even more mountainous than the rest of the peninsula. This is where Thessalonica is today. So Aristotle, that philosopher guy, was the teacher of Alexander the Great. And he must have done a decent job, because I think Alexander took over command of the army by something like 18. He dies around 33 or 34, so quite a bit younger than everyone here, even me. And Alexander never lost a battle in his life. He was a kind of military genius that seems like it's been practically unrivaled on earth. You didn't want to fight him because you didn't win. And some of it's just bananas. Like, if you want a good example, look up his invasion of Tyre. He was conquering everything. They start spreading out from Macedonia to the east into Turkey and Israel. He comes along, he wants to, he's definitely a political animal, and you have to wonder about it a little bit. So he says that he wants to offer sacrifice to a god who has a temple in Tyre. The Tyrians end up saying no. They don't want that because they figure if he comes in with his army, he's never going to leave. And Tyre was built on an island in the Mediterranean. And it was very well defended. It had a giant wall, and so the Tyrians thought they would be safe. Alexander didn't like that. And so what he did is he built a berm or a road out to the island so that they could knock down the walls. And he eventually conquers it because, like I said, we don't know of a single battle that he lost in his life. His berm actually changed the shape of the coastline, and it's still there today. And so if you look at a map of modern Tyre, like, the entire thing changed because of this road that Alexander the Great built, and how sand got deposited there over centuries, and it's still there. But again, they're evangelical, so they start to push Greek ideals into this whole empire of Alexander. When he dies, eventually it's split up into four chunks. There's a bit of history in there, but it's split up into four chunks. The Ptolemies are one, the Ptolemaic dynasty in Egypt. They rule from Alexandria. The other one that's most important for our information will be called the Seleucids. Seleucus was one of his generals, and he takes over the region of the empire that's in Syria. the Greek Empire starts to impact the Bible, the biblical story in the time of ancient Israel. If you look at the Maccabean revolt, that is a revolt, this is in the book of Maccabees, it's a revolt against the Seleucid ruler Antiochus. So, like, Jerusalem becomes kind of Greekified. They build amphitheaters, they build gymnasium, they run around naked, they have athletic competitions. That makes the Jewish people angry, and there's a revolution. The next group of people is the Romans. The Romans are even a bit crazier than the Greeks. You can tell that the Romans weren't quite as fond of shipping, because if you look at a map of the provinces of ancient Rome, you'll discover that they go much further inland than the Greeks did. The Mediterranean becomes so named. It means the middle of the world. The middle of what world? The middle of the Roman world. They called it Mare Nostrum, our sea, because the Roman Empire surrounded it on all of the sides. Rome is a group of people from the city of Rome. It starts toward the middle. By the time of the height of Greece, Rome is already rising further west. Rome is as much an ideal as anything else. Rome was called the eternal city, like the dawn of light on earth. If the Greeks thought of themselves quite highly, the Romans thought of themselves as like the incarnation of the gods. They were even more fond of Rome than the Greeks were of Greece. They have this idea of civic virtue. That becomes very important. Roman religion becomes civil, and that ends up causing lots of problems for the Christians. So the Roman Empire in the West traditionally starts in 753 BC. Its two founders are named Romulus and Remus. One kills the other one and founds the city. It's founded on 7 hills. It starts out as a kingdom and then becomes a republic. This is where we get the word republic from, or republican. Like our form of government, much of it we inherit from ancient Rome. And Rome has a group called the Senate, the Roman Senate. If you go to the city of Rome today, you'll see in a lot of places SPQR. It means the Senate and the people of Rome. Senatus Populusque Romanum. I think that's it, or Romani, something like that. You'll see that stamped on all kinds of stuff. The Romans put it everywhere. They were fond of themselves. Rome fought a series of wars with ancient Carthage. Carthage is a city in modern-day Tunisia. It was a Greek city. If you looked on the Greek map, it's a Phoenician city before that. It becomes a power, and they fight a series of wars with Rome. This is where the general Hannibal comes from. If you've heard of the story of Hannibal crossing the Alps with elephants, this is the guy. He's in the Second Punic War. Again, he's a kind of military genius. He nearly never lost a battle, and so the Romans decided to cheat. The Romans were masters of a few things, and one of them was logistics. They had a better system, a better organization for getting stuff where it needed to be and for frustrating the other guy. So after they lose several 100,000 men to Hannibal, who was one of these military geniuses, they decide to stop fighting him. And they let him chase their army around and engage in minor battles, but never really engage him. And they burn his logistical operation to the ground in Spain. And eventually he's kind of running out of stuff, and then the Romans start threatening the city of Carthage, so he has to go home. And then the Romans defeat the Carthaginians in a sea battle by building several fleets of ships because they kept getting wrecked by storms. The Romans could be kind of bulldogish and stubborn. Like, in several times they lost like an entire fleet of ships, several hundred of them, when a storm blew up. So they waited until the weather was better, and then they built another one. And then that one got destroyed, and they built a third one. And eventually one of them made it over to Carthage and won the war, and the Romans thought of themselves as great, instead of noting that they lost like 3 times as much stuff as they were supposed to. The Romans weren't good sailors like the Greeks were. They start expanding. Julius Caesar is someone you should probably know about. That's a picture, or that's a bust. They call it a marble bust of Julius Caesar. It's probably what he looked like. I think that one was done in his lifetime. Julius Caesar's nephew is Octavian, who gets called Augustus. He declares Caesar to be a god, and then that makes him the son of God, which is a rather useful thing. He starts what's called the Roman imperial cult. He defeats, what's his name? Antony and Cleopatra in Egypt. The time of Augustus is the time of the poet Virgil and Horace and Ovid and Rufus. These are famous Roman poets and writers. There's a series of emperors after that: Tiberius, Caligula, Claudius. Nero is the emperor that kills Peter and Paul in Rome. He probably himself starts a fire that burns up a bunch of the city, blames the Christians, and starts the first great Christian persecution. Rome is in the time where cities began to grow. They start to develop. Ancient cities don't get all that big because it turns out that moving to a city is the worst decision you could ever make, because they were full of disease and illness, because most of them didn't have plumbing, so human waste was everywhere. Diseases would run through populations, infections were bad, and they were challenging. So cities, until the modern world, the largest cities on earth only grew to about 1 million people. And lots of them grow, and then a bad disease comes in, or they get destroyed by someone, and they decline. Some of them, like sometimes million population cities, disappear from Earth. 100 years or 50 years later, they disappear. Roman law, that's one of the most important pieces of Roman heritage that we still have today. The Greeks were masters of plays and tragedies and philosophy, Greek wisdom. The Romans, their major expertise was in engineering and law. The Romans were crazy good engineers, and they also had a sense of law. Roman law gets inherited into Britain, which becomes a set of common law. If you're familiar with the Magna Carta, the Great Charter, that comes out of this tradition from the Romans, from the Normans, from the Romans. Like, you have to go through a couple different cultures, but Roman legal code, they start defining the rights of citizens vis-a-vis everyone else. That becomes important. So like the modern day Bill of Rights in our Constitution owes a significant amount of gratitude to Roman law. The Romans have some social classes, the patricians and the plebeians, or the plebeians. It's hard to know exactly how to say it, but the patricians are the nobility, the plebeians are everyone else. They have another group called the equestrians, from the Greek word equus, which is for horse. Actually, that has to be the Latin word. The Greek word for horses is something related to hippos, because a hippodrome is a horse racing arena, and a hippopotamus is a river horse. I forget what exactly it is, but it's something like that. Over time, Roman citizenship gets extended to more people. So Paul in the New Testament talks about himself as a Roman citizen, and that's a big deal because Roman citizens have rights. Education, the military. The Roman military is something that is well worth spending time with if you want to look. Rome, from its height at the time of the Caesars and Octavian, Rome didn't really lose a war. And part of it was because they got psychotic about how they trained their army. They're some of the first people in the ancient world to have this whole series of things. So there's like a Roman legion. A Roman legion is about between 6,000 and 7,000 men. It's organized into cohorts, and cohorts are organized into centuries. It's where the word centurion comes from. Centurions didn't always lead 100 men, so that would be the kind of linguistic link. Some centurions were more important than other ones. The leader of the cohort was more important than some other ones. But the Romans figured a lot of this out, and they were famous for, if you served in the army, I think it was for about 20 years, they would give you a discharge, and you would get a piece of land in one of the provinces, and you could go settle there. And so it was a pretty good deal, because if you were a slave, if you were poor, if you went and served in the army and survived, which was not usual, you would get a house at the end of it and land. You would become a landowner. That was extremely important. They have all kinds of military inventions. I think especially for the men, it's really exciting to look at Roman military stuff. They had all kinds of things that they figured out. Yeah, I wish we had more time. The picture is of a mosaic. So mosaic is this form of art where they take little pieces of rock and shell and they organize them into pictures. It's very, very labor intensive. It's very, very difficult. And the Romans built these in a lot of places. Romans were also the ones, I don't remember if we have many Greeks that did this, but they became famous for painting fresco style. So fresco means that they would have plaster that would still be wet and they'd paint on it as it was drying. And so if you screw up, you actually have to wait for it to dry and then chip out the part. You cut off the part that you messed up on, and then you add more and you paint it. That becomes very important for the development of art later. The Romans become very good at managing their economy. Again, they're kind of logistical geniuses. They let different provinces grow different things. The Roman family system becomes important in a lot of ways. So the Romans had a system that was called the pater familias, the father of the family, and the power of the father. Basically, a Roman dad, the Roman leader of a family, these were usually extended families, so probably a little bit more like grandpa than we would have. But they had fairly absolute rights over everyone in their house. Like they could decide to kill their children, and it wasn't a crime. They decided marriages, they decided some of that. But in Rome, for the first time in history, women start to gain some rights. They start to have some legal protections. Romans built a bunch of stuff. Hippodromes are horse racing places. They were fond of racing chariots. Roman things like the Colosseum were quite popular, where they would go to gladiatorial games. One of the greatest surviving Roman things is aqueducts. They were very, very good at building aqueducts which bring water from places. We're going to have to skip most of this. Oh well. If you want to see, the statue on the bottom is a statue of Octavian Augustus. And this again is actually that golden mean thing. They would portray him as the ideal man. And this statue is very detailed. I think this is one that he put in the Senate to kind of remind them who's in charge. Okay, the last thing that I wanted to mention are some important Roman cities. We're going to encounter a lot more of Rome because it's in the time of the Roman Empire that Jesus is born. Roman cities. So Rome is the capital of the empire, likely between 500,000 and 1 million inhabitants. At this time, Alexandria, which was founded by Alexander the Great, that Greek guy, in Egypt, is probably a more important city for the ancient world than Rome was. Alexandria would be a little bit like New York City, the important trading and financial hub, because Alexandria had access to all of Africa. And one of the things that we don't quite have a sense of is that the largest Roman grain-growing region was Egypt. They grew a significant amount of grain along the Nile River Delta in Egypt. So Alexandria was also a major grain port. Carthage is in North Africa. That becomes an important Roman city after they knock it down. Ephesus, they take over the Greek one, Antioch, Thessalonica, and Constantinople. Note, for instance, that Athens isn't on here. Athens isn't really a major city, not in the history of the world. It's important intellectually, it's important for some of the things that it did, but impact-wise, it's not really there. Neither is Jerusalem. Jerusalem is the largest city in Israel, but at the time of Jesus, it was probably somewhere between 50 and 100,000 inhabitants, and it was very much tied up with Jewish religion. And so on a global scale, it actually wasn't very important. Some places try to make the argument that London was important. I think that's a bit of a stretch. The Romans did found London. The oldest name of London is Londinium. It was a Roman city, but there weren't that many people that lived there. They founded some cities in France. Marseille is one, Lyon is another one. Lyon was the capital of a Roman province, but they don't really rise in importance. And so a lot of these are in the east. A lot of these major cities are in the east, and they disappear from history now. Like, no one now thinks of Alexandria, Egypt as a major important city for global trade or the world. It's not. Now it's New York and London and Singapore and Dubai and places like that. And most of those are much newer than this. So that's a little bit about the Roman Empire and the Greek Empire, the Roman and the Greek world. These become the two sort of cultural inheritances that are going to combine with Judaism to form the beginning of Christianity. So we'll cover the Jews next week. Anyone have questions that they want to ask me? Okay, I don't think I wrote a set of questions for the Romans, but there are some for the Greeks on page 22. I will let you guys tackle some of those now. You might have to look through some of the notes or do some thinking. Or you can dive into some of the other things about Greece and Rome to work on yourselves. And then next time we'll be working on Jewish history, and that will be a little bit more involved. And then after Jewish history, we'll be at Jesus and the beginning of our book.